And it's a great privilege to be handing over the presidency to Professor Colm. And I would like to just preface my remarks by offering our deepest sympathy and condolences to Colm for the loss of his mother. His mother died on Monday, and he attended her funeral in Ireland yesterday. And I think it's a measure of the man that he's here tonight. Now, Professor Colm, MD, FRCP, etc. I didn't like to mention the VD diploma. Came to Liverpool, started his career in Dublin, and by happenstance, it would appear, ended up in the VD clinic. I don't think he was a patient, I think he was working there. He came over to Liverpool in 1986 and was a consultant in Jersey Urinary Medicine at the Countess of Chester in 1990. He has had an exceptional career in Jersey Urinary Medicine, both on the academic side, being chairman of various prestigious bodies in Jersey Urinary Medicine, but also with his media work and his lecturing. He's lectured in most countries in the world, and his television CV includes Sex, Warts and All, Let's Talk Sex, Girl's Guide to 21st Century Sex, and HIV and Me. So I can assure you that this is not going to be a boring year. Colm, would you like to come up? We can exchange.
You're used to those clips, so maybe you do it. Thanks.
I knew this would happen.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. And I present you with your badge. They're much easier to handle. And then there's a special LMI medal which is engraved for you.
As my final comment as the immediate ex-president is that Colm has had these medals struck at his own expense, because we're bankrupt, to commemorate special lectures and special people. So thank you very much indeed.
I'm delighted with them. Thank you. Thanks. So, thanks very much, Derek, and I'd like to thank all the staff and the committee who've helped throughout the year, and it was a wonderful programme. I got to most of the meetings, and they were just terrific. I'm well used to speaking to an audience who never sit in the front row. The kind of slides I show, people try and go as far back as possible. But let me reassure you tonight, there's nothing dramatic or that will put you off your dinner. So. Who said oh? So obviously I work at Chester. I love working there. It's a wonderful place. Been there 27 years at the Countess of Chester. And I'm thrilled to be president of the LMI, and I'm really delighted we have medical students here as well. I think the place hopefully will thrive in the next year. And there was a great danger of this happening. So it would have made a very good Wetherspoons, but thanks to Nigel's intervention, I think that day is staved off. It's a stunning building, and they do tours here, and they're well worth having an organised tour of the LMI. The treasures in here are just amazing. And I presented a talk once, Treasures of the LMI, and there's loads of stuff. And obviously the mosaic down on the bottom floor is the emblem for the place, and Life is short, art long, the crisis fleeting, experience perilous, and decision making difficult. And this is the first page from the aphorisms of Hippocrates. And the books downstairs, this is a picture from one of the books downstairs. There's a stunning collection of ancient books. It's just a treasure trove downstairs, and you should do a tour sometime. There's stuff all around the place that we don't even know who made it yet. There's a gorgeous statue out there that you'll see in the dining room, presented by Thomas Bickerton in President 1908, and we don't know anything about the statue. So there's some exploring to be done. And there's the wonderful clock. This clock was featured on the Antiques Roadshow, and it's valued at about £80,000. And some of you were standing beside it tonight and never noticed, but there you go. Make sure it's still there when you're leaving, please. Keep an eye on the medical students. Where are they? I shouldn't do that. So basically, I came to Liverpool in 1986 because there wasn't enough sex in Ireland. Basically, I wanted to be a venereologist. There was no STD service in Ireland of any significance. I used to do an evening clinic down at Sir Patrick Dunn's Hospital in the Red Light District in Dublin once a week. And there's a diploma course in venereology in Liverpool, so I thought I'm going to come over and do that. And it was a brilliant place to come because Liverpool had the famous Seamen's Dispensary. Anyone who's qualified in Liverpool years ago will remember this place. Mr. Brian Plum and Michael Edgerton, and it was a unique place. It was men only. So it was perfectly suited, obviously, to the sailors. And when the HIV epidemic kicked off, it was a perfect location as well, too. And extraordinary place. And Liverpool was innovative in setting up the Seamen's Dispensary because previously sailors who had STDs were derided and pay was stopped and benefits were cut. But this was set up and there was a plaque on the door. The Seamen's Dispensary open to seamen of all nations for free treatment and advice. And people used to come from around the world to see how the Seamen's Dispensary functioned when it was opened in 1923. And even now, I was Googling websites, and this is a Merchant Navy website, and the lads were having a laugh about the Seamen's Dispensary. The consultant was Dr. Ross, and he worked there for 35 years, from 1923. So they used to call it Ross's Clinic. And then some guy was laughing that there was a band called Edmundo Ross and his Rumba Band. I don't know if any of you are old enough in the audience to remember that. So the lads all called it, oh, if you get a gross, you've got to drop into Edmundo's. Rather than saying you have to go to the Seamen's Dispensary, Edmundo's. So, and obviously, Merseyside took a hammering in the 4041, and there was the central. Now, the Seamen's Dispensary is somewhere down there. Now, when I was showing this to some LMS students about 10 years ago at a lecture, one of them said, well, it hasn't changed much, has it? I think that's really unfair. And the Seamen's Dispensary, you can see the pockmarks of the blast damage on the front wall where the holes were. So basically, next door was the Cleveland pub, and every Friday afternoon there was an exotic dancer. And the Seamen's Dispensary was closed on a Friday afternoon. I used to wonder, was there a coincidental issue? And obviously, it shut down in the 90s because it was felt things need to be integrated and everything was moved up to the Royal. I think it's a bit of a loss. And it became a listed building, so they knocked it down immediately and built Liverpool 1 car park. That's the location of it now. And myself and John Ashton and a few others think there should be a plaque up on Liverpool 1 car park, mentioning the history of the Seamen's Dispensary. And it's a pity the original plaque disappeared, but we'll see. So when I came over in 1986, the IRA were still blowing up things, and I thought, oh God, I'm coming to England, they're going to hate me here. But Liverpool, an Irish accent was not a hindrance at all. And indeed, one of the first things I did at the Seamen's Dispensary, I was saying to this young fella, and tell me now, how long's it been since you last had sex? And he said, it's been 2 weeks, Father. And I went, oh, Josh, I'm sorry. I had to restrain myself from giving him 6.5 fathers, 2 whole marys. So the accent does create a confessional atmosphere very quickly. And I had to learn a whole new language. Zach, when I drop me keks. Anybody know what that is? Apparently it's trousers. And the best one of all, and did you use a condom? No, Zach, got off at Edge Hill. Edge Hill is the last station before Lime Street on the railway line in, and it's Liverpool for coitus interruptus. Can you imagine a Scouser saying we had coitus interruptus? No, it's not going to happen. But getting off at Edge Hill was just brilliant. Loved it, so had to learn the whole new language. There you go. And one of the things that struck me, I mean, in Dublin it was see one, do one, teach one. There was none of this problem-based learning stuff. And I remember I'd be all slagging off the Liverpool students, because really the pyramid of learning, it's all down to practice by doing and teaching others. And they're all problem-based learning. Well, they've changed. And so I was slagging the students, and I said, there's my dog Paddy, up the mountain. And you do get to look like your dog as you grow older. It is a bit... Now, initially he wouldn't sign the forms for anonymity, but I got around him. And he used to be scratching the living daylights out of the door, and I spent a very pleasant Saturday morning teaching him how to open the door. Have a look at this, Paddy. Oh, wait, I'm going to show you how to do it. Go on, Paddy, get in there. Can you imagine the taste of that thing? So now he's a fully qualified professional. Unsupervised activity. Straight out there, see? So I would say to you, see that? That's proper education. See one, do one, teach one. And, but they got their own back. That's me at the contest of Chester with my ancient Jaguar. And would you look, one of them did one Christmas. Imagine. He's gone on to be a plastic surgeon. I'm not surprised. But I'll be coming down the corridor and I said, Doc, did you see your car? No. Oh. Imagine shoving that off your bonnet. And it doesn't always snow in Chester, by the way, but when I came to the Chester Royal Infirmary, we had parking spaces. Imagine that. Anyone remember that? Individualised. And they appointed Ian Harvey the same time as me. And see how proud they are of him. Mr. Ian Harvey, orthopaedic consultant. And I get a big blank under my name. They couldn't bear to put clap doctor in the middle of Chester. But you know, I know my place. And I can't imagine the insensitivity of someone who put that sign up. This just... Now, this picture's very old. I mean, we're not called geniturinary or family planning anymore, but I remember coming in, what? How could you do that? And I went straight down and said, come on lads, get that off the door. So they changed it to discharge from the hospital lounge. Do you remember that sign on the door? It was just, but of course you need to take a picture first. So, now, when I joined STD work in '86, it was in the doldrums. There was no doubt about that. Porta-cabin culture prevailed. And this was the clinic, the STD clinic in Leighton Hospital in Crewe, in the car park. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine showing a new cardiologist his new outpatient department and expecting him to say, no, but it's good enough for clap doctors and the low life we see? I mean, that was the pervading attitude. It was terrible. And I became chairman of AGUM, and we kicked up Blue Murder, and we changed the name of AGUM and MSSVD, and we formed BASH. And the first thing we did was we hired a PR company called Munro & Foster, and we still pay them £80,000 a year to do all our media stuff, and it's been money well spent. And we also set up a media committee, which I chaired, and that's been a joy. Now, we kicked up Blue Murder, and the Department of Health said there is money available, and I said, well, come and have a look at the clinic in Crewe. And they said, oh, you're just empire building for yourself in Cheshire. I said, I am not. I said, this is the worst clinic I've ever seen. They were shocked to the core when they saw this. And that was it. They put in the money, and that's the same location 3 years later. Now, unfortunately, they've been tendered out and they've had to move out of it, but it was a massive advance, and we really brought the specialty through. Basically, we went to politicians, we knew all the journalists because Munro & Foster, and now if there was an STD outbreak, they don't go to the Family Planning Association, they come to BASH. And I did a program with Davina McCall, a bit of a scary woman, but she's wonderful with teenagers. We did Let's Talk Sex, about sex education in schools. And it's only now become compulsory in March 2017 that parents cannot remove their children from sex education in schools. So it took a long time for the penny to drop. Scary woman, but good to work with. Stephen Fry was the joy. He did a program called HIV and Me, and he came to Chester for 2 days, and we did video clips and showed him stuff, and it was just great fun to be with. And I was telling him, Stephen, I'm an author too, you know. Let me show you. So I was showing him my book. This is part of a trilogy. The first one was called Which Wart? This is the sequel. What Wart? And there's a What Wart second edition out at the moment. And I was showing these pictures. He was going, oh my God, Colm, these are awful. And I said, no, Stephen, they're heartwarming, consoling pictures before and after and during wart treatment. And he's going, oh, I don't know about that. And then I got him to sign one of his books for me, Stephen Fry the Liar. And look what he wrote. To Colm, a marvel, a hero too many, but a man just a little too prone to show you his genital warts. Oh, Stephen, yeah. And this lot, I've given them slides and stuff, and it's amazing. You have people who won't show their bits to their GP, but they'll show it to 4 million people on Channel 4 regularly on this outrageous programme, Embarrassing Bodies. I've never been on it, but I've given them stuff. It has a function. And this is one of the last bits of TV that Channel 4 came to me and said, we want to do a programme called The Science of Sex. And I said, great. And they came to Chester for 3 days, lots of video clips, lots of stuff, lots of pictures. And then I heard nothing. And then I met an orthopaedic consultant in the corridor about a year later. He said, oh, Colm, saw you on the porn channel last night. Whoa. What? He said, yeah, the Girls' Guide's great. And I buy the TV Times, and I'm looking at a series of 8 programmes over the next, and in tiny print after, The Science of Sex. So me and Eileen are sitting on the couch next Monday night at 12:30, waiting for this programme to come on, and it comes on, and Catherine Hood, the GP, she fronts it up, and it's grand. And next thing, there's shagging all over the programme. But endoscopes attached to the bits. I mean, it's just, you're in the vagina watching a penis coming at you. And like, this isn't the programme I did. And then I come on, like Father Ted Killjoy, you know, warning about warts and gonorrhea and all that stuff. And then it's, thanks Father, back to shagging again for another half an hour. I didn't know what to do. Do you remember Eileen? It was just unbelievable. She was mortified. And so the next day I went in, I thought, do I lie low? And I said, no, better front it out. So I sent an email, and there's a button in the contest that you'd only use in dire emergency, and it's called All Staff. So I wrote this email saying, I didn't know this program was going to be like this. Excuse me, my bits were fine, but blah, blah. And I pressed the All Staff. The trouble with that is that only about 10 people had seen the first episode, and then 2,500 saw the next 7. So every time I down, they go, oh, Jock saw the programme last night. And even more embarrassing, all my 4 kids were at the Catholic high school at the time. And they were saying, oh, Dad, that fucking programme is just... And one of my sons, Canis, said, his mate said, I was watching that programme the other night, he said, the sexy girls guy thing, it was really doing for me. And then your dad came on. So you have no control over television stuff, but it's great fun to do it. And as doctors, if you're good at it and you like doing it, you should do it. Because, you know, we need to up the charisma. Well, unfortunately, the last 2 years have been a disaster. Some idiot in health decided to transfer public health and sexual services to councils. Councils, can you imagine? And what do councils do? They tender for bin emptying, pothole filling, grass cutting. So they tendered out services, and ours was one of the first to be tendered out. And a small village in Cheshire won the tender, despite our service being one of the best in the country. Macclesfield, have you heard of it? So we were appalled. One of the GPs in Chester said the STD service is one of the best services that the whole of the contest provides. And it was a top class, fantastic service. So we had to leave the hospital, and we're now in a basement in a GP practice in the centre of Chester. It's shameful. You know, at least we're owned by an NHS trust, because any willing provider could have got us. But a lot of the staff left, and that was a huge difficulty. And it was we had so few staff that the queues started to grow outside. This is in the centre of Chester. So some of my patients, I came in one Saturday morning, and there was people crying in the waiting room, and I said, what's going on? It was so embarrassing, she said, standing outside that clinic with that huge sign there, and the Japanese tourists going past taking pictures on the red bus, and white van man pulled up and started leering at us, and I was, oh God. So I just went outside and tore the sign off. Well, that's a start. A lot of the staff have come back and we're getting there, but it should never have happened. And the service is being destroyed all over the UK because luckily in Liverpool, and I see Mark is here, the council have managed to hold off and they're not tendering out, they're trying to do things sensibly. But that was a bad time. Now, I said I'm not going to show you stuff, but there's a few small things I will show you. We love crabs. Have you heard of crabs? They're just like nits. They're glorious creatures and they hold on for dear life. They're disappearing. They're a dying breed because the Brazilian has destroyed the rainforest. There just isn't enough pubic hair in Merseyside now to support a decent colony of crabs anymore. So they're becoming extinct. And this is one, I don't know if the video clip will work. Yeah, it was a boring clinic and I snipped one off, stuck them under the microscope and marked me registered, just put the camera on top and there's a live crab. So this will be a historic video as days go by. And I remember in Liverpool they call, hey Jock, I think I've got the sideys. Because if you pull one off and put it on the desk, they go sideways like a normal crab. And I was saying to this guy, he was lying on the bench in Siemens Spencer, you've got crabs, you've got sideys. Have I, Doc? Yeah, there's one there, look. And and then he picked it off and he's looking at it. Oh, Doc, look, a little bastard. And then he flicked it. I'm going, holy shit, where did that go? Do you think my wife is going to believe this story in 2 weeks' time? So now when I see somebody who comes, say, you get dressed and we'll talk about it. So no messing. And quickly, we see tons and tons of warts. Thank goodness the Gardasil is the vaccine that's used now for the kids, so warts will disappear within the next 8 to 9 years. But until that time, we have to do blasting and special creams and everything, so it's a massive workload. A shameful decision that they didn't use in the first place. But I remember when I was looking at these pictures last Christmas, I thought, that'd make a grand Eat Christmas. It's like the sun going down behind the scrotum on a frosty evening. I mean, it's just... Some of my pals are still wondering what that is. And obviously we deal with all the stuff, syphilis, we've got multi-drug resistant gonorrhea, so there's big business, loads of work for us to do. And even more alarmingly, we used to think oral sex was safe sex, but not anymore. It's just... And I just finish off with the magnificence of the drug companies. I mean, the drugs we now use are fantastic. And acyclovir virus was a wonderful invention 20, 30 years ago. It was really expensive for the first 10 years till the patent ran out. And sometimes we give patients, a tube of stuff to use. And one of the lads came in and he said, here, Doc, here's 10 of these. Oh, great, I had them in the drawer. And I'd handed out 5 of them to guys, rub that in 5 times a day when you get a recurrence. And then after about 2 weeks, I got a phone call. He said, hey, Doc, what do you want me to do with that? Draw you a picture. It's a pen. It's a true story. I was mortified. I had no idea. And the thing is, he's the only one who phoned. So I think there's 4 guys going around still colouring in their lesions. So beware what you pick up off drug company stands. So to go back then to the HIV stuff and that, well, obviously I graduated in microbiology in 75 and then medicine in 81, and I wanted to go straight back into science. So I'm back straight into immunology. And I had to bring all my family over by the boat. You know the boat, the Irish ferries? Oh, do you remember those days? They have one ferry and they call it the Swift. They shouldn't be allowed to call it that. When they first brought it to Holyhead, the locals called it the Eternal Flame, because it never went out. If there's any wind at all on the Irish Sea, this thing stays in Holyhead. And of course, I remember me and Eileen and the kids drove over one night to Holyhead. It was cancelled. We had to get on a big iron boat, and then 5 hours out to sea. Is there a doctor on the ship? And I'm thinking, what are the chances of syphilis in this ferry at 5 o'clock in the morning? But they persisted. Is there a doctor on the ship? And the kids are going, Dad, you're a doctor. Go on, tell him. Go on. And it's not on my fault. These 2 lads are twins. So, there's twins and then 2 girls. And so I get up and I go around to the first aid room, to the desk, and this African woman from Togo screaming the ship down, obviously 2 years pregnant and in labour. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm trying to remember what happened in Hollis Street years ago. And we go up to a huge first aid room and I'm opening cupboards and the purse is behind me saying, what are you looking for, Dr. Manny? Never mind, I was just looking for time, actually. Trying to think what comes next. Found a blood pressure cuff, took her blood pressure, that impressed everybody. And then hand in and I could feel hair and a head. And it's our second kid. And we're now passing the Isle of Man. It's a stormy night. And is everything okay, doctor? Yeah. And I found a huge forceps. I don't know what it was for. And I broke the waters and then the baby came out head first. Oh, fantastic. And I was holding the baby up by the legs thinking, this is great. And then what comes next? There's some midwives here. You know, I couldn't think what came next. The placenta. And then the minute I heard the word placenta, I thought midwife. And I said to the purser, did you ask for a midwife? No, go and ask for a friggin' midwife. so over the Tannoy system, is there a midwife on the ship? And my poor wife, and wondering, where the hell has he been for the last 4 hours? Oh no, no. I hope he hasn't been at a delivery. There was 40 pissed midwives from Wigan going to a Daniel O'Donnell concert in Dublin. So one of them came up and mercifully delivered the placenta. So I thought, But I never went anywhere, even those with a camera. So I took a picture and everything's black. The baby's black, but I'm black as well. I mean, it just looked. So I took it up to medical illustration and Joe and our colleagues tarted it up for me. Yeah. And I got it into hospital doctor. My mother was so proud. You know, my son, the gynecologist, yeah. Better than my son, the clap doctor, which he wasn't. So consulted on how to deliver baby on ferry, and then it just rolled on. The Chester Chronicle, doctor at sea, sails through first birth. It was great. And look at the Irish Medical Weekly, a very good job for doctor. Yeah. So it just shows you, you know, you can publish in the BMJ and the Lancet means nothing. Get a piece in on the magazine and the local papers in your hero. So really, the message is, you know, if somebody does call for a doctor, sensible people should go, not guys who go and put in chest drains with a Foley catheter and a bottle of Perrier water. Do you remember that in the play? Yes. So I say I'm a straight back into science. That's me. I did 1 year as a technician in the virus reference laboratory. I don't know if any of you remember this technique, but these are monolayers infected with herpes virus, and you're looking at cytopathic effect, and you'd have to look at the tubes every 2 or 3 days. But 1981, the first paper kicked in. That was when we were just starting in immunology at the time, and I realised there's something funny going on in America. And it was the very first paper suggesting that there's some kind of immune deficiency in homosexual men and intravenous drug users. And this was December 1981. And there was guys down at PCP. And in fact, it was a CDC technician who raised the alarm because he was getting requests for pentamidine all of a sudden all over the place. And they only used to get about 2 or 3 requests a year, but for people with, you know, liver transplant and bone marrow transplant. But suddenly there was a lot of young men looking for pentamidine. So he keyed all the names in, and then they checked out and they found they were gay or drug users. And then Kaposi sarcoma, an incredibly rare tumour. Now this is the first patient I ever saw. This is 1984 in Dublin, and I was doing an STD clinic, and this young Trinity College student turned up, and I'd seen a picture in a textbook just a week beforehand, one of the first textbooks, and had Kaposi's on the palate. I got that biopsied, and that was Kaposi sarcoma, and that was the first ever patient through the Irish STD system. There was no HIV test then. It was just, once you've got Kaposi's, you've full-blown AIDS. And I went back and did locums in Dublin, and I saw him over the next 2.5 years, and he died of CMV meningitis later. But the Kaposi's went on relentless, obviously. And even then, I mean, most of you weren't even born then. This is a paper I wrote from work I did in 1985 and 86, when I was taking blood off gay men, testing them for syphilis, Hep B, HIV. And we noticed then, when the test became available and we were able to go back and do it, if somebody had past history of syphilis or hepatitis B, they had a very high risk of being HIV positive. And what was throwing the epidemiologists was the 4H club: homosexuals, hemophiliacs, heroin, and Haitians. Now, how did that fit? And because we all assumed this is going to be a virus, but how did the Haitian bit fit into it? Well, if you want to read the Spartacus International Gay Guide there, while I'm getting a drink. So if you had a read of that. If you're turned on by beautiful black guys and you can adjust to Haiti's extreme poverty and lack of creature comforts, you may indeed find Haiti paradise. And many gay men from New York and San Francisco did find Haiti paradise. And these were heterosexual Haitians who would happily accept money for sex. And the trouble was, Haiti was decimated when all this came out. And basically, When the Belgians left the Congo, they needed French-speaking administrators, doctors, nurses and people to run the Congo. And the best place to get was Haiti, because they could speak French and they were well educated. So thousands of them went over to the Belgian Congo. And many of them got infected in the Congo because they were there on their own without wives and family and stuff. And then when it all imploded in the Congo, they all went back to Haiti, taking HIV with them. And then the connection with the gay men from San Francisco, New York spread it to Haiti. And even worse, there was so much skullduggery in Haiti that the blood transfusion service was run by gangsters. So a lot of the bloods that was sent to America and all around the world from Haiti was actually HIV contaminated. So that was how Haiti fitted into it. And at this stage, we still didn't have a virus. Now, this is Rock Hudson dying in August 1985. And the virus was discovered in mid-85. And obviously, this was causing havoc in circles all around the world. This is the famous quilt. It now weighs 54 tons. It's the biggest piece of art in the world. And of course, the hype and hysteria was rampant. And even in the UK, this is a newspaper from 1986. "I'd shoot my son if he has AIDS," said Vicar. And he pulled the trigger on the rest of the family too. I mean, can you imagine being diagnosed with AIDS under those conditions? And we saw patients like that who just, and once you get Kaposi's sarcoma on your face, you were obvious to everybody what you had. Now, Princess Diana was a star. She enormously helped destigmatize HIV and was a huge psychological help to many of our gay men particularly. And this is the kind of crap that went on in Ireland. 67 reasons condoms spread AIDS. Condoms and needle exchange was still nothing in the Republic of Ireland. And the Catholic Church would not agree for condoms to be used, even in this guise of preventing infection. And this highly expensive leaflet was sent to politicians and journalists and newspapers all over the place. I always said it's a pity they couldn't have found 2 more reasons. And then it'd be 69 reasons why. And the leaflet would have been the laughingstock it deserved to be. Yeah. And even worse, in Africa, which was undergoing an implosion of AIDS, people in Africa were saying, "You're blaming us for AIDS, get out of here," and they stopped bloods being taken out of Africa for future studies. And there was all this stuff. This is a Nobel Prize winner saying that AIDS, virus was grown in a lab deliberately to infect Africa and curtail the population. I mean, that really set back research in Africa for a long time. And then the big breakthrough, Reagan and Margaret Heckler, they held a press conference, and there's Robert Gallo announcing to the world in April 1985, he discovered the virus that caused AIDS, and it was called HTLV3. Hands up who remembers HTLV3? Yeah, absolutely. So that was fantastic, because they grew the virus, and that meant they could produce kits to test for HIV, match it against the antibody, and suddenly we now had a test, and it was the HTLV3 test. But there was a bit of suspicion knocking around at the time, because the French were dealing with HIV in Africa, and they were looking at lymph nodes. So the French had electron micrographs of lymph nodes. They knew there was a virus there. And they sent the virus to Gallo in America and said, "Look, we've got this virus. We think it's causing AIDS. It certainly causes lymphadenopathy. And we're calling it lymphadenopathy associated virus. Can you get it to grow, because you've got the skills?" And Gallo wrote back twice saying, "No, we didn't get it to grow," but he did. He did get it to grow. And as molecular biology improved, they actually were able to do studies on the virus that Gallo had managed to grow in his lab, and it was the French virus. So there was uproar over this. This was scientific misconduct. And it's a shame he didn't come clean, because his laboratory is brilliant. The French couldn't grow the virus, but Gallo could, use it with the brilliant techniques he had. So instead of saying, the French found the virus, I've managed to grow it, and let's split everything 50-50. So in the end, the French eventually got everything. They got the Nobel Prize, and Gallo has ended up in a bit of disgrace, despite the fantastic science. So, this was a very sad chapter in the science of HIV, to have such enmity and selfishness, really, when what was needed was pure science. And there's been a lot written about it. And then where did it come from? Well, I met Edward Hooper, it must have been 15 years ago, and got him to talk at one of our meetings. He spent 10 years researching HIV. He was convinced HIV came from the polio vaccine that was scattered all over Africa. And there was a real possibility that it could have been, because it was made from monkey kidney tissue. And we knew that HIV could be present in monkeys in a form. And then another fantastic book, The Origin of AIDS, from Jacques Pepin, who actually worked out there. And it's now proven beyond doubt that monkeys have simian HIV. And they infect each other. Chimpanzees kill monkeys, they eat them, they tear them up, and there is exchange of blood, and these viruses are mixing in these populations, and they're producing new mutants all the time. And inevitably, because humans in Africa, they do have to chop up monkeys and use them as food, and it's a very bloody business. There's bits of bone flying around, and it's quite easy to see how humans get infected. So humans have been getting infected with these viruses possibly for hundreds of years, but we know for certain for at least 70. And all it took was it to propagate out of the village that the person was infected in for it to become a worldwide disaster. So basically, we've now been able to analyse the strains of HIV that we have, and you can see there, this is the one that's infecting the world. Now, simian 2 is a very poorly sexually transmitted virus and will probably die out. But these are all actual transmissions of virus to humans. So this has been going on for a long time. It just happened that this virus was very good at transmitting sexually. It was at the time of war, and then people were moving from the villages into the towns, and men were there on their own, and they might have sex with prostitutes and get into the prostitute chain, and then the big African road all the way up through Africa where prostitutes were stationed all along and helped transmit it all along Africa. So it required urbanization to make HIV spread out into Africa. And then obviously they didn't know what was happening because they didn't have the science to look at it. It was only when it hit the shores of America that it became obvious. And there's also increasing, and Pepin is fairly sure of this, that the actual vaccination campaigns in Africa helped promote the spread of HIV. Now you might think, well, that's really far-fetched, but we have a perfect example of that in Egypt. Unbelievably, there's over 1 million people in Egypt infected with hepatitis C. From what? From a program to clear bilharzia or schistosomiasis from the population. This turned out to be a medical disaster. You know, 7% of the population of Egypt are hepatitis C positive from a disastrous medical intervention, just unsterile needles transmitting. So it's probably certain that HIV was also transmitted around Africa through the ill-advised vaccination programs. And there's some wonderful books, The Band Played On by Randy Schultz. When he was writing the book, he was a gay man. He had a HIV test, but he didn't want to know the result until the book was finished. And he ended up being HIV positive. And he helped create this myth of patient zero. Have you heard of this? It's not quite correct. The CDC were looking at the spread of HIV, and these are a typical chart. And this guy here is patient O. And these are New York, Los Angeles. So he was O because he was outside California. But the journalists thought the O was a 0. And they called this man Patient Zero, and Randy Schultz's book helped promote that. It was a Canadian airline steward who did have lots of partners. But it turned out that HIV was in America 10 or 11 years, way before this guy even came back from trips to Haiti. And so then, what about the African situation? It's a disaster, but things are slightly looking up. And I remember I went out and I did my medical elective in Zambia, in Lusaka. And that's me with the lads. And it was all malaria and slim disease. Because people were dying of AIDS then, but nobody knew what it was. And there was no research going on. And now there are villages in Africa where all the middle-aged group are gone. And you've only kids and elderly people. That was the daughter of one of our doctors out helping. So back to Liverpool, and Liverpool has something to be proud of in all this HIV, the needle exchange schemes. And I have to say, John Ashton was and is a hero of mine. Basically, when I did the Diploma of Neurology in 1986, John Ashton came in and did a talk. And he was absolutely passionate and enthusiastic about how there is an epidemic happening and we must get needle exchange in, and we must get condoms, and we must get education programs out. And he drove needle exchange through in Liverpool with enthusiasm and gusto. And it was the first large-scale syringe program in the country. And that was now recognised as being phenomenal. And it has massively reduced the risk to Merseyside. In Chester, I have one HIV positive drug addict. And Mark Lawton, in your clinic in Liverpool, I presume you've less than 20. I mean, it's amazing that the needle exchange is fantastic. All the patients who've been saved getting HIV and all the millions of pounds saved by people driving through these programs. Great work. And in Dublin, I remember I was so enthused with John's talk, and I'd got my diploma of neurology. I went back to Dublin and worked again for a while in the STD service and in immunology. And I wrote to the papers saying, you've got to wake up to this. And a journalist phoned me up, and I was on television with the Minister for Health. And I was saying, you must do needle exchange. They wouldn't do it. This was condoning immoral behaviour. And they would not do needle exchange in Dublin. So by 1989, 50% of the regular injecting drug addicts in Dublin were HIV positive. And when I went back to do locums in 1990 in Dublin, the HIV clinic had several thousand patients, and half them were drug addicts, and half them were up in the prison. It was just a nightmare. And of course, they infect their girlfriends who have babies, so there's hundreds and hundreds of HIV positive babies in Dublin, all down to this reluctance to confront the problem and bring in needle exchange. And I submitted a paper to a meeting in Dublin at the Royal Society of Medicine, and I called it A Tale of Two Cities, and I was comparing Liverpool and Dublin. Do you know they wouldn't accept the paper? I was the medics in Dublin wouldn't accept the paper. They couldn't face the criticism. And just to finish with an example of what we see, this is a businesswoman in Chester, finally diagnosed HIV positive by her GP. She was complaining of being tired all the time and relentlessly, and he gave her a long session, tested her for everything, HIV positive. Her husband was also positive. And she had some vague visual symptoms. So I don't do all those things. You do in the exams when you fiddle around. So I sent her around to the machine, and you put your eyes in and you get this. She had homonymous hemianopia. That means her whole vision to the right was completely gone, and she hadn't really noticed that. She was starting to slur her speech. And did an MRI scan, and she's got progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy. It's a big lesion in the brain like that, and it's universally fatal. And many of us have this virus in our body, but our immune system is dealing with it fine. So I remember taking it to Liverpool and said, what are we going to do, lads? And the guys in Liverpool did a lumbar puncture positive for this virus, and it's universally fatal. But this is about 6 years ago, and the drugs had started to kick in brilliantly. So we put her on triple therapy, and she had a miraculous recovery, complete resolution of her vision and dysarthria, and she's back at doing her business. And I see her on a regular basis, only see her twice a year now. She takes one tablet a day. She's undetectable. The drugs are amazing. But the UK, we're getting 6,000 new cases a year every year. This is the first year there's been a fall to 5,000. And we think that might be due to this. This is pre-exposure prophylaxis. This is like the morning before pill. If you take these drugs a few days before you have sex, even if it's receptive anal sex from a HIV positive patient, you won't acquire HIV. That is amazing. So they're expensive drugs, and there's a bit of an issue about that. And I remember I was in a debate once, and this is a Photoshop, really. It's not true, but I just wrote it to stimulate the debate. I mean, just because you won't use a condom, you want us to pay £400 a month for your drugs. So there is a debate to be had. But luckily, you can actually buy it on the internet. Because this kind of thing, is bad for the NHS and bad for publicity. Here's patients who want cancer treatment, and the NHS is saying, well, we can't afford your cancer treatment and the HIV pre-exposure prophylaxis, so which is it going to be? But luckily you can buy it on the internet for 40 quid a month. So many of our patients are buying it on the internet, 40 quid a month legally, going on the drug, and they're not getting HIV. And then, of course, the biggest one is treatment as prevention. If you diagnose somebody reasonably early with HIV, put them on the drugs, the virus load goes undetectable, they will have a normal lifespan, and they cannot pass it on, no matter what they do. Isn't that amazing? So that's the way we're going to beat this. By treating people as soon as they're diagnosed, they can't pass it on, end of the epidemic. So it's all down to testing. We need to do a lot more HIV testing if we're going to get there. WHO have set a global goal of 90% diagnosed, 90% on treatment, and 90% fully suppressed. And in 20 years, if we get that, we will have stopped the HIV epidemic. But the key is getting people diagnosed. So there's some, I say the prospects are looking good. So I'm quite privileged to have seen AIDS when it was at its disastrous worst, and now I'm seeing it, and it's just incredible. The patients, I see them twice a year, they're back at work, they're living normal lives. It's extraordinary. So thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed the building. Have a look around, and it's just a stunning place, and I'm so glad to be present. Thanks very much.